Oh, we're live and we lost Andy right off the jump, and we're off to a great start. That's how I would like to open every late night happy hour, by just kicking my brother out of the room. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky, joined tonight by Mike Sando from The Athletic, senior NFL writer at The Athletic, formerly of ESPN, and just one of the as Jordan Rodrigue on our Twitter feed noted, three goats. She gave you the highly coveted three goat rating, Mike Sando.
I'm old enough to when a goat was a bad thing. Okay, that's how far I go back. But now it's great. I'll take it.
Yeah. No, you want to be a goat now.
Yeah,
I mean, just in case you're not sure how the kids are talking, a goat's a good thing.
I got two kids, so a little bit rubs off on me, but not too much.
Do they refer to you as a goat? Like, do they consider you the goat of the Sando household?
They mock me. Okay, my boys are 15 and 19 now, and they are both still living at home. Luckily, our 15-year-old is still living at home. I haven't kicked them out yet, but they love to make fun of me.
You're quite the benevolent father.
Yeah, and I just love having sons, and they're into sports too, and so we razz each other. It's just one of the great things about having kids as they get older. We really are starting to bust on each other a lot, and it's fun. So I've got a diehard Packer fan, I've got a Seahawk fan, and it's just fun when they get into the sports stuff too.
Particularly at this point, they're out of warranty anyway, so you can't return them, you can't do anything with them. So might as well keep them around.
That's right. Yeah. Well, now they can start, paying their own way a little bit, jobs and stuff. It's a little bit better. So
I mean, these are very difficult, turbulent times. Like, everybody needs to chip in at this point. I feel like nobody is either safe or really doesn't have some weight to pull, even if you're 15.
Yeah. Well, luckily I'm still at The Athletic, so my 15-year-old doesn't have to contribute too much income to the kitty. But as soon as it's legal for him to work, we're putting him to work. It's been a great thing for my oldest. He's out of the house at like 3:30 in the morning for his job, so I give him a lot of credit.
Nice. I respect that waiting until it's legal. I think that's a really a great move as a parent. So kudos for that.
What's he doing at 3:30 in the morning? Is he down at the docks or something?
He's on a distribution truck, and he goes out there and he's running like snacks and sunflower seeds to different mini marts and Safeways and stuff. It's a little dangerous at that hour at the AM PM. Let me tell you. I mean, he has told me, some of the stuff he's seen, he probably he wished he didn't see, but it's been a great experience for him, and he's learning to work. And what more could you want as a dad,
Mohisi says, get him a work permit. He can work now. High school signature is all you need. High school signature.
I love it. I love seeing them learn how to work. That's a good value for him.
Waiting for us to figure out how to do that.
Well, that's the whole trick. I haven't worked yet, so all I do is write about football, talk about football, and could have never imagined that.
There's so much stuff we want to get into with you, Mike. I mean, you have a great feature up at The Athletic that is, and I say this in the most complimentary way, exhaustive when it looks at some of the initiatives into hiring and trying to increase diversity in the coaching ranks and the executive ranks in the NFL. It's an incredible deep dive into that. We want to get to that. Obviously talk about quarterbacks because you do the quarterback tiers thing and about these things. And we are fascinated by quarterbacks and Jared Goff in this town. But I think where do you want to start, Andy? Is you want to go division or do you want to start with the Rams?
We'll start with the Rams. That'll take us into the NFC West because this division, I mean, maybe there's a caveat right now with the Niners all of a sudden dealing with a rash of injuries, but it is a brutally hard division. Yeah. Between the four teams, they have collectively one loss at the moment, and that team lost to another NFC West team. Yeah. It's amazing.
It's a great division. Before the year, I took the Vegas win totals for all the teams and just plugged them in and looked by division. And I think the NFC West was the number one, the highest expectation for wins. And that's with, I think, the general public kind of overlooking the Rams, and some of it was, the uncertainty. There's changes on the coaching staff. You felt like they'd been figured out a little bit. There was some decline, right? Even the numbers for Goff weren't quite as good. They weren't horrible, but this wasn't like a 4-12 team, and I think people got kind of caught up in the narrative of, look, they made a couple mistakes on Todd Gurley, Brandon Cooks. They, mortgaged their future supposedly by getting Jalen Ramsey. And yet they were, a 9-7 team last year, and they blew out Seattle 28-12. I think they blew out Arizona at one point. They really probably should have beat San Francisco. I think they lost on a last-second field goal, if I remember. And now you sort of come back into the season, and what I was waiting to see is, okay, defensive coordinator. Is that going to be a positive? We didn't know. It looks positive so far. And then I think McVay is kind of back in the groove. I think we're seeing what a good coach he is. So it's only 2 games in, but very tough division. And I think the Rams were sort of the team that was overlooked coming into this year.
So, yeah, I mean, they've looked good. I mean, especially in the first half against Dallas, particularly. The second half, the rhythm was, they couldn't quite get that same offensive rhythm. But, they went and beat a team that a lot of people, expect at least to win a division and get in the playoffs and all that stuff. So are you buying sort of 2-0 at this point? Are you waiting to see what happens in Buffalo? How bullish are you on this team right now?
Yeah, I mean, I buy the 2 wins. I thought Dallas was a very overrated team coming in. I think they're the opposite of the Rams. I think they're a team that people love. And I look at the Dallas and see a lot of structural, almost systemic issues with how they're set up, the weirdness of their coaching arrangement. I just wasn't as high on them. So I thought the Rams could win that game. And I think, yes, I'll be watching to see this week against Buffalo. I kind of feel like the Rams might win. I could be wrong. This could be the game where they play a really good defense that gets after Goff and makes him look a little rattled. We've seen that occasionally. And then people will all turn and say that Goff can't do it. And then they'll win some more games.
Brian, you want to ask your obligatory Jared Goff question?
Very Rams skeptical, very Goff skeptical, and we'll get to Goff here in a minute.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is definitely warranted, but I think the combination of him and McVay is a good one. So I do think they're going to be right in the mix. I think now if we see San Francisco drop some, that helps a lot, right? I mean, I'm not guaranteeing playoffs or anything, but I don't think they're going to be worse than they were last year as far as a record. I think they'd be right in that range, and if they can stay healthy and have the offense going, like we didn't know, we haven't really known what the offensive line was going to be. If glass is half full and not half empty, I think you have a team that was they were up and down last year, but they were a tough out for some teams. I think they're in the mix.
That's what I think me, Mike, at the Cowboys are overrated. So I am here for the rest of you've earned yourself 53 more minutes of.
We put that down on our on a
podcast
coming into the year. We put that down. That was the headline: Cowboys overrated. And I was just hearing so many other people talk them up, and I'm just like, that's a whole nother podcast. But
to quote Django Unchained, you had my curiosity, now you have my attention. With the Rams, though, I mean, and you touched on this a bit, Mike, it was a weird season for them last year in that they missed the playoffs. And when you miss the playoffs coming off a Super Bowl appearance, it looks like a pretty steep drop. And they definitely weren't as good as that season. But at the same time, they weren't bad either, which I think made it for a lot of people difficult to sort of keep in perspective what they really were. And also, I mean, and I know I want to ask about this later, there was a lot hanging over this team with just the Todd Gurley situation, which I think that drama also created a perception of things being, I think on balance, worse than they actually were.
Well, right. And so for this team, and justifiably so, I mean, McVay and Gurley have gotten disproportionate amount of the credit, right, for everything that went well. And so when McVay seemed to be figured out a little bit, the Detroit game, Chicago game, when it started to turn, I think that was the end of the 18 season, I think, and then carried in, and then Gurley falling off a cliff, right? I mean, now you think, okay, McVay's still good, but not as good as he quite was. And then Gurley's out of the mix. What are they going to do? Right. Well, they had to get some other guys to play Gurley's position. And I think we've seen a little bit more hints of some explosive gains in the passing game, which were a huge staple for Gurley, a huge staple. I'll even give you, this may even be a note in my Monday column, but if you look at explosive gains in the past, right, more than 15 yards, if you go to the 2017 season, I think they had 18 of those at the running back position. Okay, that's a lot. The next year, I think it was 14. And then last year it was 3. And this year it's 2 already. So we don't know that it's going to be back to where it was, but that's a huge part of their offense. It's a huge part of making life easier for Goff, because you think of the types of throws that those plays bust on. They're easier throws, but they're usually against pressure. They usually mitigate pressure, which is the one thing we know. I mean, any quarterback will center, but we think that Goff has a harder time than others, right? I mean, that's the knock on Goff. So, he's not going to spin out of there and Russell Wilson it, right? So you're confirming that.
I think that is a fair evaluation.
As I often that a little bit more strongly.
As I always say about Goff, and I actually, Brian and I go back and forth on this all the time. I actually think Goff is better than Brian does, but his rookie season, I remember the first time I saw him actually run.
I think I know what you're going to say. I think I know the play. I think I know. I'm going to hold up two fingers of the player that I think you're talking about. Go ahead.
I was like, has Jared Goff ever run in his life? And I don't mean like as a quarterback. I'm like, has he literally ever just done the act of running? Like, I've never seen a professional athlete look that uncomfortable running. So to your point, he's not somebody that you look at to make something out of a broken play. He needs to play to stay together.
I thought I was going to somebody run. Does that look like 25 to you guys? Is that on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. 25. Richard Sherman lit him up that year. Remember that? Goff was running to the sideline and he got hit like good quarterbacks don't get hit. You know what I mean? You rarely would see like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson just get slobber knocked on the sideline, right? And that happened to Goff, and it was just part of that 0-7 run. And I really did think, oh, this just doesn't look like you were saying, it just doesn't look like a real guy. But how long do you have to live that down? You went to the Super Bowl with him. It wasn't like he had a bad year. When things have been right around him, he's been great. He's really put up good production.
You wrote something. Well, you wrote something along those lines this week about him in that comparison with I think it was with Carson Wentz. And I think it was a scout saying that he'll make 8 good throws in a row, and on the 9th one you wonder what happened, what went wrong there. And I think the Dallas game was a great illustration of both what gives people hope, but also what's in the back of their minds. Like you mentioned, the pressure thing. He was perfect in that Dallas, the first half of the Dallas game. And but the flip side is there wasn't anyone within 12 feet of him at any point in any of those drives. And he was able to drop back in rhythm. Everything was super accurate, but it's not, but what happens when it gets bad? I think that's part of the problem. So how do you evaluate that? I think is the hard part.
Yeah. He's sort of the opposite of Josh Allen in this game, right? I mean, Josh Allen, and this year has been more accurate, but has struggled with some accuracy, but can make something happen and run and all that kind of stuff. And Goff, when it's nice and around him, when the lake's real calm, he can really cast his line out there, and I do think that is an issue. I mean, that's a limitation, right? I mean, I think the best guys in the league right now can beat you from the pocket passing and can beat you with their legs running, right? If you look at my quarterback tiers thing from this year, it's Mahomes and Wilson are the unanimous tier 1s. Breeze kind of made it on a legacy. I think he's falling out of that. Deshaun Watson kind of sneaked in there. Those guys can all beat you passing and running. And of course, Lamar Jackson is on the rise and will probably be arguably should have been in tier 1 already or will be this next year. And they can all beat you those ways. So Goff isn't going to do that. But the comparison to Wentz can beat his legs, but he beats the Eagles too, because he's running around trying to make too much happen, doesn't have always the best judgment and decision-making. So you can work around the limitations that Goff has, but you're going to be left wanting, I think, when he just has to absolutely do it himself in a way that he can't do based on the style of quarterback that he is.
With all that being said, then, how much higher do you think his ceiling is than he's already reached as a quarterback, assuming he's got solid pieces around him, all quarterbacks to some degree, unless you're talking about like a Tom Brady, they need weapons.
Oh, no doubt. Everyone needs a baseline level of weaponry, but with McVay, I think you're going to have a good system, right? Their receivers get 1,000 yards, 2 of them, which is not every team can do, especially when they're not Julio Joneses. They're good receivers, but they're not just guys who could line up on any team and get 1,100 yards. Every year. I think Goff can grow in the areas that, like Russell Wilson has grown, I think, in the last few years, just command of the game. I think Goff is still overcoming the stigma of the coach runs out and whispers in his ear before the snap and then goes running away, like Pee Wee football,
Right.
which is probably a little bit unfair, One of the great comments, I think, in the piece that I wrote this last week was, whenever Goff does well, it's because of McVay, and whenever he does bad, it's because of Goff. It's a pretty good way to have it if you're the coach, and it's probably a little overblown. I mean, I think it's not giving him his due, but he can grow into the command of it and be running it and be the guy up there making his own checks even more than he is now, and really owning the offense to a degree that he hasn't early in his career, coming out, of the system that he came out of and then having terrible experience as a rookie. How many guys could even overcome that? I mean, how many guys have?
Oh, Jeff Fisher has killed weaker men than Jared Goff. There's no question.
Yeah. So, what's a real, they can go to the Super Bowl with Jared Goff because they have. So to me, that puts you in probably closer to the second tier than the third tier. Usually. I mean, there's not that many guys that are just, barely move the needle guys who go to the Super Bowl. It's not like he was Rex Grossman or something, I mean, I think he has been the quarterback for a really, really productive offense. I don't think when it was going well, people were going, God, if they could just have a different quarterback, they'd be even better. They were scoring almost 30 points a game.
Well, actually, it was funny. They were both watching the offense explode and saying they could have a better quarterback than Goff.
Yeah, but they could have a better quarterback, but how many are there?
Well, that leads exactly what I want to ask, because this is again part of it.
You might actually have a number in mind. If anybody knows exactly how many quarterbacks are better than Jared Goff, it's probably you.
Yeah.
This gets to another of the running debates between me and Brian in terms of Jared Goff, who has just been a running debate for me and Brian for like 3 years. Is Jared Goff appropriately paid? Not overpaid, but appropriately paid.
Yes. I mean, I think when you look at it, depends how you look at the contract. Okay. If you look at the contract for what his APY is, right? Whatever, is it about 33 million? Is that right? You would say at the time that he signed it, that's unfortunate for how good he is, right? Because that was at the very top of the market. So what's happened since then is the market, the very top's gone to 45, right? And then the next tier of the market is like 40 or 39 is about where Deshaun Watson is. So now you take, okay, whatever his 33 is, but remember, he had like 2 years left on his rookie deal when he did the deal, right? So the team is looking at that as, okay, existing deal here, add on 33 million per year after that, but really we've got him for like 2 years plus the 33. So to them, in their mind, they're thinking, okay, we got Goff for 27 or 26 or whatever it would be. And that's not how everyone looks at it, right? If you have a quarterback who reaches the market like Kirk Cousins, it's a true $30 million deal. That's truly what it is. I mean, it was 3 years, 90 million or whatever, and you're actually paying that. The Rams are looking at his a little different, and the market keeps going after it. So he probably is appropriately paid in the market right now. I don't think people, I think if you look at him and say you can't win because he's making that amount of money, that's probably overstating it, given the way things are. Now, the cap's going to go down next year. So, it's probably maybe it's too much for next year, but in the big picture of things, I think you have a Super Bowl quarterback who's produced pretty well. They've won with them. I mean, they've got to, if you look at the last 4 years, are they 35 and 15? I think there's 3 teams better than them. They might be tied with Baltimore. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, so shut up, Brian.
I mean, you have to pay him because
they would love to be paying him less, but I mean, that's just the way it goes, right?
But it's one of these deals too. I mean, I get it. Like if you let the quarterback go, and this is sort of like a fun sports radio topic. As that contract was coming, like, do you let him go because it is such a luxury to have a cheap quarterback? And the Seahawks went through this. And the Rams went through it, and like the things you can do with your team if you have a competent, cheap quarterback are spectacular.
Russell Wilson's slightly better than competent, though. Like if I go over, I've got like 17 screens here. If you just start looking at who the quarterbacks are in the league, though, that are coming in as replacements, it's really Sam Darnold and Drew Lock, and you know what I mean. They're not all Russell Wilson.
Right. So I'm saying, like, so if you let a guy go who's good, and Goff was clearly good. I mean, like you say, got him to the Super Bowl. Russell Wilson was able to do amazing things making like intern money. If you can do that, it gives your team incredible advantages. And so, there was that, kind of fun kick it around. Like if McVay can turn anybody into a good quarterback, do you let him go and kind of cycle through it? And you can't, because like you say, most of the other guys who come through are Drew Lock, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and you can't just make people into great quarterbacks.
Nick Foles, list all the guys they had,
Right. And so that part of it, I completely agree with, but I think where it got tricky, and you mentioned the salary cap going down, and this gets into some of the other things the Rams have done. In comparison, I think to the Seahawks, it's an interesting thing. And you talked about this with the Vikings, I think, too, on The Athletic.
Sure.
The Rams have put out a ton of money for Aaron Donald, which obviously makes sense. Money and stuff for Jalen Ramsey. They just paid 2 wide receivers and all that after churning through Gurley and Cooks. And are they back to a place where they're starting to put their money in better places to have sustained success? Or do you think they might still be in trouble?
I don't think they're really in trouble. Now, they have a lot of second and third round picks on their roster who they're counting on to do well, and we'll see if they're able to re-sign the ones that do well, right? I mean, I think that will be the ultimate test. So far, so good. Some of those guys are coming in and doing okay for them. As far as money in the right place, elite cover corner and somebody who affects the quarterback and Donald, that's kind of where you want the money, right? I mean, and then quarterback is kind of one of those where it's where the money is going to go. I mean, let's just say they'd done your thing and they drafted somebody, but it didn't work out. So then you're in that veteran market, you're paying $22 million or $25 million for Bridgewater, right? And that's, in their mind, that's what they got Goff for when you add the extension on to what they already had, right? So I don't have a problem with where their money's at. I like it that better than like Philadelphia, who I was talking about. They have the oldest starting lineup in the league, and they've got guys like Alshon Jeffrey on the roster, Jason Peters, who's clearly at the end, Deshaun Jackson. Would you like to be, going with that at receiver? I think for the Rams, they have in their receiver group, number one, Robert Woods did not do a huge deal. Robert Woods had multiple years left. He did a Jason Kelsey type deal. Hey, it gives him a little bit of money in his pocket. It boosts the APY a little bit, but that is not going to be hurting the Rams. That was a nice deal for them on their terms. That's one of the reasons all of the details for it didn't come out immediately, right? Because it wasn't being advertised. The Cooper Kupp deal was an interesting one because next year with the cap going down, the franchise tag number for receivers is going to go down to 15.3. So that was a little bit hanging over him, right? He didn't want to have a 15.3 cap. He's already had an injury. He wanted to beat that average. And so for the Rams, they were like, okay, if we beat that average, I think they beat it by $300,000 or $400,000 a year. They buy the tag back, right? I mean, now you have the tag for next year. If you wanted to use it they've got, I think, a tight end maybe coming up, a safety. Those types of guys that are a little bit cheaper on the tag gives you flexibility. Kupp and Woods totally fit your offense. They're willing to block, all those little things. They can line up and get 1,000 yards for you. They work well with your quarterback. No, they're not going to be. The other teams in the league aren't going to be like, oh, if we could get Robert Woods, but it's a good fit for you, right? They're your type of guys. I don't have a huge problem with that, And then next year, what happens? Does Whitworth come off the books? Does I think they've got another 10 million. Is Leonard Floyd in that mix too? Guys where you have a little bit of flexibility where you could move if you needed to move on from somebody, and create some cap space to maybe pick up a veteran here or there. Maybe Brockers is in that mix. So I don't think it's as dire as people make it seem. And as far as
the conventional wisdom that the Rams are in really tough shape, it's not that bad.
Yeah, you can make the case, though, like if you say, look, Goff totally wilts under pressure, that's a waste of money. These 2 wide receivers aren't that good. What are you paying those guys for? Ramsey, you gave up too much. So you can spin it that way, but I think they're going to keep having a pretty good record. And if you look at who teams are drafting in first rounds, especially late, you're going to be later half in first round if you're the Rams probably. You'd probably rather have Jalen Ramsey than the guys that Philly is taking at the end of the first round, or look at who Seattle's end of the first round picks have been. They haven't really been that great of players, right? Or like the 49ers took that, the linebacker who went out of the league and then went to the Redskins, went to Washington football team. You know what I mean? You're taking
Still
chances.
getting used to.
You're taking chances on guys that are at best 50-50 propositions to be good starters. They got Jalen Ramsey. I think Jalen Ramsey's the best corner in the league.
Now, every time I look at my fantasy thing or roster or whatever, and it just says football team.
Okay. I know. It does say football team. Yeah.
It is the most, by the way, Daniel Snyder thing, like Daniel Snyder led proposition that you had all of this time and you made this big proclamation that, you're going to be focus grouping and all this stuff. And everybody knows that you're going to have to change the name. And the best you can come up with is we're going to kick this down the road.
Well, I wondered if they were doing it so the next owner can pick it. I don't know what the future is there, but maybe not. Maybe
I had not thought of it that way.
There's a lot of weird stuff. It was just weird how the other owners were like trying to get out of there. It looked like they were sort of backstabbing a little bit, how
do you have a name ready? Like, I mean, this is coming. How do you can turn things around so quickly and make yourselves look like you're really this is, how do you not have a name ready, or at least 5 names ready? And it's amazing.
Quite the place. Yeah, it's quite the place.
Well, I mean, when you spend several years, vowing over your dead body that you'll never change the name and you don't care what anybody says, it does hint to perhaps maybe you haven't been jotting down enough alternatives.
Yeah,
you haven't been spending enough time thinking about it.
Yeah, very, very bizarre. Wow. Yeah, you see, you wouldn't want to be covering that team, would you?
No. No, God, no. No. And we know people who've kind of been around. I mean, they just say it's awful, like just an awful, toxic organization.
The Rams' problems are much better problems.
Yeah, for sure.
No, our time around the Rams, I mean, we're not like, somebody like Jordan or Lindsey Theory or somebody like that who's around them day in, day out. But the time we've had around them, they seem like a very well-run organization. And certainly inside the locker room, I think it's a pretty strong positive culture. I mean, with the issues that they had with Gurley last year in terms of his usage and his unhappiness with his role and that tension, and it was the elephant in the room all season. And you knew that there was tension over this, but it never felt like it boiled over into something that was, growing toxic. I mean, it was an issue. And I think in a lot of ways, Gurley being in Atlanta became addition by subtraction, just because you have closure on the situation. And then also, too, you're actually now able to use your running backs, because with Gurley, there was like an obligatory amount that he had to be on the field, but he wasn't effective. So it just was hamstringing him.
Yeah, I just think it's nice that he's no longer tweeting every day about them paying him. I think that's a nice touch to not have them asking for the money. So I take it that went through.
He was owed the money. I don't blame him.
I never saw the end of that. Like, do we know? Because there was one other guy who's waiting on his bonus, I think, too. And
I think the checks must have cleared, by now, or else we'd still be hearing about it. But yeah, I think McVay does a good. I think McVay's a really good coach. When he was hired, I think people sort of mistakenly around the rest of the league, thought, X and O guy, offense, and I think they were looking at him more for his leadership and just sort of, kind of his ability to communicate, all those other things that usually get underrated in what makes a coach really good. And then he does bring the X and O part of it too. But I think his ability to handle the team has been pretty good.
He's just so damn handsome. It's hard to criticize the guy. I mean, let's be honest. I want to. You have a great feature also up about Aaron Rodgers that kind of looks at trying to figure out exactly like, has he declined and what's going on there, and it's again another one of these really great comparisons and lots of numbers in it. But the question that really gets to me, and it relates to the golf stuff and it relates to Russell Wilson, and what is the best way to evaluate quarterbacks, and how do guys inside the league do it? Because these financial questions are so massive. Yeah. You can't win without a good one, but trying to, how do you figure out who's good, who's not, and how much of it's personnel or coaching or whatever?
Yeah. I think that, that's where I went kind of with the quarterback tiers process, and it was me just talking to a lot of people in the league, tons of people, and sort of trying to figure it out. And so really your ability to succeed with less around you is what determines whether you are one of the real guys, right? So for like Russell Wilson was a really good player right away in the beginning of his career, but he had the number one defense in the league, a historic defense. They were number one in scoring defense, I believe, for 4 years in a row. They had Marshawn Lynch, who was had a big target on his back, right? And they ran the ball a lot. So people wondered, why isn't Russell Wilson polling higher in the quarterback tiers? And it was because of those things. So then you wait and see, okay, they pay Russell Wilson. The defense goes to the middle of the pack or the bottom of the league. The Marshawn Lynch leaves, and they're still in the playoffs every year, right? So I think once you kind of prove that over a couple of seasons, that's how we know. And some guys only do well when it's really good around them. And it doesn't mean you can't win with them. It just means that they're less of the reason why you win with them, right? So Rodgers has, had that team competitive, obviously, when they've been really bad on defense and special teams and really blown games for him. The Seattle game where they're way ahead, well, he didn't blow that game. The onside kick, there's just disasters have happened there. Ridiculous stuff. If nothing else, he's been the miracle worker there with Hail Marys and all kinds of amazing, spectacular plays. You can see that he makes spectacular throws, even when their offense hasn't done as well. So the piece that I did was really looking at to what extent his weapons were culpable last year in why his stats weren't as good, And so I went through and charted and, had some guidance from some coaches in the league on what were the missed opportunities and how does that compare to normal, and they were really high last year. I would say this, though. Now, I think Rodgers is playing even better independent of that this year. I mean, he really looks amazing. So, that's kind of how you tell, right? I mean, what do you have around you?
With that in mind, who's a quarterback that you think doesn't necessarily get the credit that they deserve in terms of just skill set and how good they actually are?
I think Dak Prescott was a little underrated in our poll. I'm just kind of looking up here at the list of the quarterback tiers. He came in one spot below Wentz, and I think that I get it on the evaluation coming out, but I think that he could have been a couple of notches higher. Let's see, as I scan through, it's amazing how accurate these are. I think it gets it pretty right in terms of, when I look at the guys at the bottom, I wouldn't be just completely pushing them up. I think Cam was another one. Cam Newton was just hard because we didn't know, how healthy he was. But I think those, Lamar Jackson came in top of the second tier. And I think you could easily make a case, that he would be in tier one already. And I think he's probably proving that this year. So I think I'm when I look at the list, I kind of nod, I sort of agree. I don't see a lot of just egregious, oversight. So there's usually good reasons for it.
Like, well played, Sando. Well played.
It's not me, though. I'm pulling the other guys. I don't have a vote. But when I look at it, I think I'm just in so many of these conversations with these guys that I see it a lot of the same way.
I realize they're professionals, but how good are they at there's always a tendency, I think, in sports to overrate your own players and sort of either underrate another teams, certainly among sort of fans and observers. Is that a problem within the league with teams and their own guys?
I find that it only usually is occasionally with a head coach and his guy occasionally. But for the most part, no, guys, people would be kind of surprised that way. Like, people in the locker room that are on the team, that are in your own front office, they know what they have, They really do. If you went around and polled them, teammates on somebody who is in tier 2, but the public thinks he should be in tier 1, those guys are going to get 2s and 3s from their own locker room. I did that for a couple of years after, when I was doing this early, and it was just all private. I wasn't obviously going to out the players on their team, of their teammate who they like and respect, but people on teams know what they have. You can usually see it by how they play too,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always hard too, like, especially, in a sport that's got this type of strict, cap, you got to really hit right. And, I imagine that these guys can sometimes, I would think that it's hard at times to really be able to have a complete objective view, just because the stakes are really high, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I think that would make it hard.
Well, the truth on this is that people have their evaluations out of college, and those die hard. it takes a while for people to play, sometimes to play for a player to play his way out of what somebody thought of them coming out. Russell Wilson was too short or whatever, you didn't like Goff coming out because of this or that, right? And then he has to sometimes that guy has to prove it an extra year almost, it feels like, sometimes with some of the personnel people or just evaluators. I think that can happen, for sure.
Speaking of guys that despite going number one overall, there were a lot of questions about, Kyler Murray, he's obviously off to just an amazing start. Looking up some of his numbers, though, this was kind of bonkers. He's 9th in the NFL in rushing. Like Arizona is 5th right now in rushing in the league, and it's actually propped up more by Kyler Murray than Kenyon Drake, who's about 12 or 15 yards, something like that, behind Murray. Is Arizona for real, do you think, in terms of the start that they're on, and just what do you see as Murray's trajectory right now?
Yeah, I think Murray is real, and so that makes them for real longer term, right? And I think they've got a good quarterback and coach combination, which those are probably the two most important things. And it was interesting in the quarterback tiers discussion this last year. Kyler Murray was in it. I don't have rookies in it, but if you've played a year, you're in it. So his very first time in it, he was the first quarterback in the third tier. He was actually ahead of Goff, and some other guys who've had some good years in their career. That's high optimism. One of the I don't know if it was a criticism, but one of the points made by a defensive coach in it was, hey, if he could run more, look out. If he can run more, he'd run a little bit more aggressively. He was just he was tiptoeing a little bit last year, and he is so small out there. When you look at him, it's like the first year of watching him, you're almost distracted. At least I was. It was almost
I know what you're saying.
As a kid running the field wearing a big helmet, you know what I mean? He's unusually small, but he can really throw the ball and just really has a feel for things. And this year we are seeing him run more, and you're still not seeing him take huge hits, right? I think that's a critical component for almost any quarterback long term. Why take the extra hits if you don't have to? And for him especially. So combining those things together, then they go out and make one of the great moves of the offseason. To be able to get DeAndre Hopkins while unloading the contract of David Johnson, that's an awesome move. I mean, those are two moves, getting Kyler Murray and then getting a great weapon for him, and then keeping your offensive coach and system, which obviously didn't happen for somebody like Baker Mayfield, who people were high on a year ago, has set him on a great course. I think he is definitely for real. That makes them for real and probably in a lot of the games.
Again, it just speaks to how tough that division is. San Fran will see how their injuries work out. But
is Jimmy Garoppolo good?
I think Jimmy Garoppolo is solid tier 3. I would probably put him below Goff. And I think we can see with Kyle Shanahan and the type of offense that he wants to play that he's not looking to just hit the gas pedal with Garoppolo, right? I mean, he's more apt to really want to focus on the run game and take the ball out of his hands in 2 minutes and do those sorts of things. Some of that is just because Kyle Shanahan wants to be that way, but I think some of it is he probably realizes that's best for their team. So I think Garoppolo does have some good flair to his game. Like he will make some interesting kind of improvisational throws and kind of aggressive throws, almost risky throws. But I always feel like he's going to be a little bit turnover prone sometimes too. And when talk about pressure getting on Goff and bothering him, I think it really bothers Garoppolo too. I remember that Super Bowl. My wife could not stop talking about just how good looking Jimmy Garoppolo is. I had to leave the room. Like
it's not just relative to you. I mean, it's relative to everybody.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I
like not 0% chance that Tom Brady ran him out of town, not because he was worried about taking his job, because the handsome comparison thing. I 100% believe that is a possibility.
Oh,
Yeah, it had to be a factor. Clearly,
Oh,
anyone
I
would
mean,
you'd be unnerved by it. You know.
yeah. I mean, look, when you've been, not just the man in your town just for that type of achievement, but like, when you double as a potential model. I mean, like Tom Brady's like a Stetson face and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden you got this guy, looking over your shoulder that, might actually be better looking than you. That's going to unnerve you.
I think that's a huge hidden factor that isn't talked about enough. In fact, I should do quarterback looks tiers. You can put them in.
It is a handsome position.
People would absolutely read it.
That's a pretty good idea. So I have to figure out what the tiers are.
Well, I mean, Brian and I have theorized about this for a while. Like, because if you look over, most quarterbacks tend to be, I think, somewhere between solid looking and good looking. Like, you have to be an outstanding quarterback, like, to pull off if you're ugly. Like, you have to be just outstanding. You have to be fantastic.
A hideous human being.
Name a Hall of Fame quarterback though who was horrible looking. I mean, this is a terrible exercise. Apologies to all you Hall of Famers, but can you think of any?
No, I mean, it's a credit to all these guys. I mean, like, really, like, because I think there's a certain charisma that goes with being a quarterback, like getting people to buy in, stuff like that.
Right? The ability to command it.
Yeah. But
it's not just, you don't just rank the quarterbacks tier wise by looks. You also have to then compare quarterbacks with their backups. How many quarterbacks have a backup who's better looking than they are?
And then backup. Yeah. Yeah. No, that is, I mean, if we did that, I mean, Garoppolo would definitely be the top of the NFC West. I think you'd have to say. So,
yeah, I mean, we don't know the NFL editors over at The Athletic really at all. But I mean, feel free to pitch this one. We'll give it to you.
I'm going to be on that. Yeah, I will credit you for coming up with it.
I'm sure you will. Yeah. I would imagine that you will.
There is a psychology of leadership thing going on here, but I'm going to dig into this. You guys talk. I'm going to Google. It's fine.
You can Google just ugly quarterbacks.
Okay. No, it's a long-term project.
Raiders right now, off to a good start, and Derek Carr is paced right now. It's early, but for a career best season. And there'd always been these rumors of Gruden not being sold on him. Where do you think the two of them stand right now? And recognizing, again, small sample size, what do you make of his start?
Well, I looked at his last 16 games. Okay. 71% completions, 23 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 104 rating, 8 yards per attempt. That's pretty good. I think you can live with that. I've always felt like Carr wasn't necessarily the style of quarterback for Gruden. That Gruden wants a guy who's just, gargles razor blades, right? I mean, that he wants a swashbuckling guy who just projects, has a little bit of an edge to him, and if you look at the guys he's been with, whether it was Rich Gannon, who would literally, rip your head off, right? He might get in a fight with you after the play. Brad Johnson was definitely a grinder. But John just almost has never seemed completely happy with his quarterbacks, no matter who they are. It may not be personal, Derek Carr, right? He's always been a little dissatisfaction. So I think Carr must be in a pretty good place with them right now. I mean, you're 2-0. He's played pretty well, and I think this is a big one this week because I think it's a good opportunity to win. I don't think New England's as good as they've been, but I think it's a tough one. I think you look at where the Patriots strengths are, and Cam Newton's thrown the ball pretty well. So if Carr can go into this game and sort of deliver a victory, and maybe even have better stats than Cam Newton or be the better quarterback in the game, I think it could go a long way. But I still feel like it's a long season. And when they signed Mariota, I know he's not in the mix right now, but when they signed them, I was suspicious. I thought we might see him play games. So I think we have to see how it goes over the course of the year, but you couldn't have asked for really a better start. And if he gets the win in New England, I think it's a high point of Carr's career.
Andy, I'm glad you brought up Derek Carr because in that context, if you go and you Google Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota, it's a handsomeness question there. Like from a handsomeness issue, Mariota's kind of really breathing down Derek Carr's neck here. That's
I think there's a lot of pressure on Carr there. Just to look.
Maybe that's why Gruden brought him in.
I don't think that Gruden really cares about the looks of the guy, though. No, I don't. I think John is looking for probably an extension of himself, right? And is Derek Carr that? I mean, I think to the extent that he plays well, he is. But I think before the season I did a piece, that was sort of like execs around the league worry us on every team, and one of them was that, like, I think for the one for for Vegas was that the Carr would have one of those seasons with good stats and Gruden still wouldn't think he's the guy. It's like, what would he actually have to do? Can Gruden be won over? I mean, when has Gruden really been won over by his quarterback other than Gannon?
Why do you think that happens with Gruden? Like, and I guess part of the question I'm asking with that would be is, Gruden is a massive personality. He is a massive presence. He seems like somebody who, very much drinks the Kool-Aid on the John Gruden brand. And with that being said, like, does that make it harder to buy into anybody?
I traveled with Monday Night Football with John Gruden for about 4 years. I went to every quarterback camp for 3 or 4 years. So I've been around John, and as far as the quarterbacks go, I think when he was doing his quarterback camp, it felt like he liked everybody, didn't it?
Well, you got to get guests.
I think John loves quarterbacks in general, but when it comes down to his quarterback, I see a little bit of a similarity with McVay. Okay, McVay learned under Gruden, in that when, like I was saying earlier, when it's going well, it's Gruden's offense. It's McVay's offense. When it's going bad, it's kind of on the quarterback. And how does it sort of work out that way, right? I mean, it's sort of a nice way to get it if you're the coach. And I don't think McVay has ever said anything to, negative about Jared Goff that I can remember. But Gruden always just sort of has that about him. Like, it's almost like you just pick up on it, right?
But it's interesting, though, because McVay will only say bad things about himself. Like, that's it. The only person he will ever criticize or even hint at criticism with is himself.
Yep.
He is incredibly positive towards his players.
But it's still the same way, though, right? It's if it's going well, I don't know who gets criticized when the offense goes bad,
right? But it's not because of him. Like, for example, in this show, when we do well and big numbers on a thing, that is entirely based on the work that I'm doing and the questions I'm asking and all that.
Yes, related.
And for some reason, people don't tune in or whatever it is, that is because of Andy. Yeah. And I make that clear to anybody who asks and many who don't. But so with McVay, though,
he's talking. His Wi-Fi is so bad that we can't hear him.
You can't hear Brian right now?
No, I can't hear Brian. He's like he's underwater.
I just did a good joke.
He was saying that whenever the shows go well, good numbers, good viewership, high engagement, it's because of what he was doing. Oh, yeah. Low numbers, low engagement, etc. It's because of me. And he tells that to anybody who listens or asks, or even some people who don't, like just some rando on the corner.
Yeah.
Go ahead. If me now, I don't know if you can, but how hard is that to pull off as a coach? Where how do you do that without it?
I think you have to have been good and have to have had success with your offense and be really perceived as a good offensive coach. And I think that's clearly the case for Gruden, and it's clearly the case for McVay. And Gruden probably, through being the commentator that he was and being the doing the Gruden's quarterback camp, he almost enhanced his credentials as a coach, right? I mean, he never lost a game all those years and had the Super Bowl ring, and comes back in it, and I think there was a lot of excitement around it, and I think John's got a great personality and magnetism about it, right? There's an excitement to him. I think people gravitate towards that, and definitely, and to that extent, I think McVay has a real magnetism to him too, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's hard to be more of the man and be more magnetic than those two guys are. Maybe that's part of it, right? How could anybody come in and out Gruden? You're always just sort of this. You're in his orbit,
Well, that I know, and I think I speak for Brian too, was a bit of a reason that I was skeptical when the Raiders brought him in, and to like that just gigantic contract, and that type of commitment is. You wonder with, I think, somebody like Gruden, if sort of like just the aura of John Gruden is what sells him, as much as any, his actual coaching. And, like, for example, and the source on this is, open about the fact that he didn't get along with John Gruden, but we worked for a while with Keyshawn Johnson. And if you ask Keyshawn, John Gruden is not the greatest coach in the world. He's certainly not, somebody that you would commit that type of money and years to, and that he doesn't buy into a lot of that. But obviously there is a magnetism to John Gruden, and he's somebody that has that type of charisma and, if nothing else, perceived credibility.
Right. Well, in that case too, you got to remember Keyshawn was with Parcells, right?
Yes,
Keyshawn's with Parcells. He's very much a Parcells guy. So
yes, he
is.
May
look at Gruden in a different way. And also, I think he was already in Tampa, right, when John got there. So, big personality, and Keyshawn's a big personality, right? So now you come in, and
that is fair.
Now it's suddenly Gruden's show, right? And so that could certainly affect how somebody on the team who has a big personality. I think you can't out Gruden, and that probably isn't great for everybody, right? For people who want to have that personality. The question is, could a quarterback come in and be the guy, be the identity of the team? Could that happen? What if Gruden got somebody like that, right? Would there be a deference, or would there be, still the guy? And I think, that has happened. I mean, so Mike Holmgren had Brett Favre, right? I mean, Gruden was actually there at that time. You can have a big, powerful coach who has a quarterback who still has a spotlight, and maybe we just haven't seen John Gruden have that guy yet.
So are you, because Andy was skeptical, I was skeptical. How do you, where this is year 2 or 3 of this? I forget.
Three. I think 3, correct, Mike?
Yeah. For John Gruden?
Yes.
Yeah. 18, 19, 20. Yep.
Okay. So how does this end? Because I was skeptical that it was going to work out, but they had flashes last year where they looked, pretty reasonably competent. Now, obviously 2-0. With some good personnel. How do you think this ends for him?
I think it probably ends. I think the next stage of it will be Gruden seeking out his own quarterback, right? And I don't mean like this week or whenever they don't get to where they're supposed to go, it won't be John Gruden. John won't be out. It'll be the quarterback probably would be out, and then we'd see him go with try to get a different guy or that sort of thing. I think there would be time for that. I think he's been a good hire for them, and that he puts them on the map a little bit. I think he does run a good offense. I think he's done a nice job with the play calling, and I think the productivity's trending up. We'd certainly say it is now. So, but I do think that he'll get a chance with the quarterback. That would be the next step.
You've got a really good, extensive piece that you co-wrote with Lindsey Jones up at The Athletic right now about the lack of diversity in coaching ranks in the NFL, front offices, really like positions of power and influence in the NFL, ownership. There's a lot to unpack in it.
Yeah.
But I guess sort of as an opening question on all this, what do you see as the roots of, I guess, real progress moving forward along these lines?
Well, I think for the first time, the second time, the first time the league really, took ownership on the issue was with the Rooney Rule. And I think the Rooney Rule did help spur growth in the head coaching ranks for minority coaches. Certainly the numbers were worse before that. They got better than that. They've sort of plateaued. But now, the league actually has a huge focus on developing diversity and inclusion programs for all of their teams, which means documenting who, not only the demographics of all your employees and coaches, but then having the ability to track who's rising and who's not rising and being able to figure out why. Because we haven't seen as much upward mobility for minority coaches in many cases as we have for white coaches. And so, like, I think 35% of coaches in the NFL are coaches of color. And yet I think coaches that, since 2013, coaches that have the words quarterback or offensive coordinator in their title, it's been like 8% people of color, right? So there's a huge gap there. What they started to do is they've really increased the number of quality control type coaches, right? Those are the entry level coaches that come in. You'll see some of those guys, in several years ascend to being a quarterback coach or a head coach. They've really increased the number of that, and almost all the gains are to minority coaches. So they'll be able to track that. That's only happened the last couple of years. They'll be able to track that the next few years and see, okay, are those coaches rising in the ranks? Are they becoming position coaches or not, and why? So I think just taking ownership in knowing what the numbers are, top to bottom of organizations, creates the potential for picking up trends or accountability or just having an awareness.
Right. And you have a lot of great data in the piece on everything from breakdowns of teams across the league to the balance when you have a black head coach or a minority head coach and the racial makeup of the staff.
Oh yeah,
all kinds of things. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was a comment in there about that question of like coordinators, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, like that's sort of the traditional feeding ground. And somebody said, this sort of kind of made the point about have almost like an obsession with choosing guys from that group, the hot offense, the hot defense, and not looking as to whether or not they have the qualities that make a good head coach. Yes. So what do you think what are the qualities you think that tend to make good head coaches in the league? And is there somewhere some level of experience, some type of thing that really ought to be kind of a feeder, or is it just, you need to look at the people individually and less at the positions that they've had?
Yep. I think they are communicators. They are able to communicate their message to the team, to the public, right? They are not necessarily a guy who runs this type of scheme, right? Or that type of scheme. I think when you look at leaders in anything, whether it's the CEO of a company, whether it's a political leader, whether it's a coach, it's not so much the details of the scheme, right? It's not necessarily what platform they believe in specifically politically, right? It's the ability to lead and communicate, hopefully have some character to you, and be able to communicate your vision for the team and implement your vision. We have a certain style we want to have on each side of the ball, or we have a certain way we want to carry ourselves, and to be able to credibly communicate that to the team, and then to be able to teach. I think you have credibility as a coach if you can help a player become better, right? And then when you talk, then we get to the specialty on a certain side of the ball. That can give you credibility of, hey, when we're in dire straits, can you fix it? Can you make us better on that side of the ball? And I think what's happened is there's been so much focus on that last part. Hey, this coordinator's a great schemer. That's what too often the owners hire that first. When I think that has to be, you have to be a good football coach. You have to be able to do that part. But it's those other things that usually let you down, right? Your ability to lead and communicate and all of that. So it's a little bit of a hard one to, you can't just look on a spreadsheet or something, or look and see how the teams did statistically when this guy was running the offense or the defense or whatever. To get that, you have to really have conversations with them and get a feel and be perceptive. And that's hard for us to do, right? I mean, it's hard for us to look and put together your list of who are the next candidates. Well, that takes real research to know who can do that.
That actually leads to one thing that jumped out at me in the piece was a comment you got from Mike Vrabel, the coach of the Titans, about how in 2018, when he got hired for the job, he purposely didn't bring in Wes Welker or Larry Izzo, who were former teammates of his. And he said, and they're really good friends of his. They're two of his, as you said, two of his best friends in coaching. And he said, it's not that hiring your friends is a bad thing. We all have people that we trust and call friends, but maybe that's not the right balance, that your relationship off the field, you can't separate the relationship that you have off the field from the relationship you need at work. Maybe that's not the right person to hire. And what I found interesting about that is just the idea of moving outside your comfort zones, whatever those comfort zones are and however they're defined in terms of your hiring, because it's easy to just go with what's most familiar to you, what feels safest, especially if you're somebody like Mike Vrabel, in his first head coaching job. One of the things that impressed Brian and I about Sean McVay was he hired guys like Wade Phillips, who in theory could have been his replacement if things didn't go well. And there was a certain amount of discomfort, I think, that at least could have been there. I think Sean McVay is pretty secure. But wherever, I think there needs to be some degree of discomfort in terms of this whole situation if you're going to try to evolve it forward, because otherwise people are just going to rely on what's familiar.
Yeah, it's really a hard process because, number one, it's kind of like when you build a team. We all have theories on what positions we'd play, but you don't take over a blank slate. You take over a team that has way too much money in this position, right? So when you become a coach, you know who you would like to have for your assistants. They're not all available. You can't get them. And there's a time crunch, and there's 4 other head coaches that are new trying to hire too. And it's all happening fast. And there's money issues involved. And so it's hard initially even to get the staff you want, right? And meantime, you've been coming up with your closest friends, and the assumption is sort of like, hey, when one of us gets a job, we'll bring on the other one, right? And of course, you kind of want to do that because you already trust this person, right? You know they're going to be loyal to you, because when you come into that building, you're 0-4. What happens is people start building cases against you in the building, right?
Yeah.
People start positioning themselves. It's not just a place always of great trust and everyone's on the same page. People have agendas, and people have opinions on who we really should have hired as offensive coordinator. All those dynamics are going in. So I think it's a very challenging thing to do and hard to get right. I give Vrabel credit. I think he's really grown into the head coaching role himself. I wasn't necessarily overly excited by the hire initially, but I think you can kind of see him growing into it. And it's pretty good of him to have not hired a couple of his best friends when he didn't think that was necessarily best for the staff, even though it would have been probably awesome for them and they would have had, a nice time having beers at the combine together.
Brian, are you frozen? Are you still there? The last question I know I have
looking at when you think about I'm still here, but I'm here. Go ahead.
The last question I have on this topic is, and again, people. I was
just saying, like it's if you have, you.
I can't hear Brian. So
okay, there we go. The last question.
Better now. This is
yes. It really, on a lot of levels, it's much better.
Out of there.
The last question I have with this, and again, people should read this piece that you wrote with Lindsey Jones because it's really good and there's a lot of information in there. How much do you think the league actually cares about this, as opposed to the league recognizing because of external forces that it's something they need to do?
I think the latter is definitely involved, and I really compare it to the concussion issue. So when the concussion issue came up, the league was in denial first. And then after a while, the league was backpedaling. Went from denial to we're trying to get into position. And then what did they do? They went and started doing all the research themselves. And now all the information and narrative on concussions comes from the league, doesn't it? I mean, we're not suddenly having 10 studies coming from somewhere else because the league is talking about it and doing it itself. And I think on this issue, the league's doing that too. They have completely beefed up the human resources side. They hired Dacia Smith, who's in the diversity and inclusion realm. He's their chief people officer. That's not a job that existed years ago, and they're taking hold of it. And so, do I think that all of the owners think this is a hugely important issue and are supporting it? Heck no. I mean, we know that isn't the case. But whether the commissioner's doing it because he thinks it's in the best interest of the business future of the league, or whether he's doing it because he's really taken things to heart, matters on some level. But the fact that it's being done either way is probably the most important thing. The thing that'll be measured on. And so I think it's, the proof will be in kind of what happens next and how things are handled. But this is way further than I think anyone ever would have expected the league to go 10 years ago, when they could just take positions that were the height of arrogance and get away with it. That's not happening anymore.
It's good to see. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Before we go, we want to show people this.
Look at
Sando.
My face is a little fuller now.
How young are you?
Around there. I was either 17, probably. Yeah, they won it in 87, so I was probably said they won it in June of 87, so I was probably 17 years old there. Yeah. Yep.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Big Laker fan at the time. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was my favorite player. I had a Magic Johnson 1989 MVP shirt. Man, used to be on the edge of my chair watching those games with Boston. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, but Boston's doing their best to try to make that, the finals this year.
I hated those old Celtic teams. I hated them, but now I defend them. I defend their honor. You sort of start to defend the eras that you were from.
You can defend the era without defending them.
Oh no! Now I have a complete appreciation for how where they're no threat to. They're not going to win a title against me. And now now it's over. And I can enjoy and watch them. I'm like a huge fan of them now, of that team, those teams now. But man, I hated them then.
Oh
yeah.
You want to talk about they're all like funny looking and weird looking dudes and gangly.
So good too. They just and there was such an arrogance, I always thought, to Boston. And just the 16 championships or whatever they had won to that point. And you just Red Auerbach puffing on the cigar and Larry Bird never smiling as he just drained another three in your face and stared you down. And you're like, how did that happen? But now you look back on it, you're like, wow, those guys were amazing. I love highlights.
All I know is that Kevin McHale was like the 7th most oddly shaped person on that team, which is saying something.
Kevin McHale could probably still score in the post now. He had like 185 moves, that you could never really figure out how he was moving his feet, and he would somehow, be shooting down on the rim with the longest arms you could imagine. So
he was pretty great. There's no question. He was pretty fantastic. And again,
handsome.
That is a young fan.
That is a young Sando. After that, I was actually a season ticket holder of the Raiders too. So,
wow. Well, you have to take us a picture of that for the next one.
I don't know if there are pictures of that. It was probably about 95 when they moved back to Oakland. I bought
like you with the big shoulder pads and the helmet and all that kind of
stuff.
I
didn't have any of that going, but those guys were all out there in the parking lot. The parking lot was wild outside the Coliseum. There'd be guys riding around on Harleys and stuffed dolls of the quarterback for the other team being dragged.
I remember I flew back from Oakland on a weekend. I was up there, I want to say for a Grateful Dead concert. Okay. But as I was flying back, it happened to be a weekend that a bunch of people in LA had been up in Oakland for a Raider game. And, clearly this is pre 9/11 because you could never do something like this again. But all these people are on the plane in their Raider costumes and like spiked shoulder pads and we
should see that guy. Remember the Violator guy? He had the big spikes on his.
Yeah, literally there were guys on this plane with spiky shoulder pads. I'm like, wow.
You'd see those guys in the airport. Because at the time I was not even living in state. I'd come down. My old neighbor and I had tickets down there, so I'd come down to a few of the games or half the games or whatever. In the airport, you'd see the same people in the airport whenever you went. Raider fans are diehard. Like them leaving is terrible for Oakland, but their fans are like, doesn't matter where the team is. It's a religion, you know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Like that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Trip.
Yep. I look forward to getting down there actually. So.
Raiders in Vegas, like honestly, I'm shocked it took this long to make that happen. Like really, it feels like everybody had been wasting their time not having the Raiders in Vegas. It's just perfect.
Isn't it amazing that the ultimate mover and shaker, Al Davis, couldn't get stadium nirvana, and then Mark Davis, who nobody took seriously, has them playing in this amazing stadium in Las Vegas. Pretty good deal.
In fairness, that haircut makes it very hard to take Mark Davis seriously.
It's unbelievable. He really needs better influences. You talk about quarterback look tiers, you know. I mean, owner.
Have you ever been to PF Chang's with him?
I have.
He apparently loves it.
God, we're a weird dude. I just have to say, like, you know, I mean, people ask all the time, would you trade your haircut for that guy's hair? And like, I'll take this look over what Mark Davis has got going on every day of the week.
Yeah, it's a rough one, but hey, he owns the team and he got a stadium built in Las Vegas. So
I think it worked out well for him. All right. So much great stuff from Mike Sando right now that you should check out at The Athletic. Andy mentioned the story with Lindsey Jones. It just really is just a great deep dive into this question. All the stuff about the quarterbacks, it's all up there at The Athletic. And I think they're still doing the subscription thing where you can get in like on the cheap for like $1. So get in there and subscribe. It's great stuff, great coverage. Thank you so much for giving us an hour and now really an hour plus. You know, right into the weekend. Great stuff.
Appreciate it. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
After Goff is hoisting the MVP at the end of the year.
Oh, you heard it here first, Rams fans.
Against him. I wonder how, you know, it's never going to be perfect in the NFL. And so, like, he does seem to get a little bit skittish when the pocket breaks down.
I'm with you. I would like that dual threat ability too. And if they can find a guy who can do that, take him, you know.
Or just throw the ball a little cleaner when the pocket breaks down. You don't have to run around. Just a little more.
I think it's a fair criticism. So, you know,
and Mike Sando is 3 GOATs, 3 GOAT rated by Jordan Rodriguez.
Follow him on Twitter at
GOATs, or is that? Yeah, no, yeah.
Follow him on Twitter at Sando NFL.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. Next week, what do we got? We get back to basketball on Monday with Jason Jones, Molly Knight and Lana Berry. Tuesday and Wednesday, Josiah Johnson, Mo Tequil, Vinny Bonsignor on our Football Friday, talking more Raiders. We'll see everybody next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Niederland.
You got Josiah Johnson coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a